Go west, young man, go west. I remember all those black and white movies and early cowboy movies, and the pioneers, they're going west. They're looking for that land. It's very romantic. It's something that we long for. I think there's something in us that wants land, be it a little bit of land or a lot of land. This is Sandi at Suburban Homesteader Wyoming, Arizona, and this morning we are in our series of the top 10 reasons why you should homestead in the city or suburbs. Our last video was number 10. This week, number 9, we're talking about, should you buy land? Should you take that step, move away from the city or suburbs, and buy some land? A lot of times we leap before we think. And so it's always good to break it down, see what it really costs us, see if it's something that we really want, or do we want to stay right where we are in the city or suburbs and homestead right there? But let's do the pros and cons. Let's look at it. Now, when you live out in the country, you got your land, you see the stars at night, which you sometimes do not see in the city. You're away from other people. Now, that can be a pro and that can be a con. Depends on your personality. Some people are very happy all by themselves in that circle of family, and they're content with that. But make sure everybody in your family is on board with that. Because it's one thing for you or your husband or wife to be gung-ho, we want this land, we want this property, when your spouse or your one or more of your kids, that's really going to be a tough thing for them. They're very social. They really like that interaction all the time, every day. It's a balance. So you have to look at, is this right for my whole family? Do you want to be your own boss? Or are you going to drive into town every day and have a job? Or are you going to try to make your homestead profitable enough to make it so that you don't have to work outside of your homestead? These are things to think about. But probably your biggest thing to think about is the cost of land. Sometimes we see land for sale and it's a good price. But why is it a good price? Why is it way less than other properties that are by it? Now, there's different types of land when you move to the country. There's unproductive land, there's pasture land, there's farmland, and then there's cropland. And there's a difference, and you pay different amounts for those. Down here in Arizona, we don't really have what, quote unquote, you would say is farmland. We do have cropland, and that is at a premium. Lots of places down in our area, the river used to go, it was very wide, and so it has a lot of rich soil in there. And that premium cropland down here where I live can run $25,000 an acre. Now, most cropland down here runs $7,000, $8,000 an acre, which is a big investment. There are areas that you could have some pasture as long as you were bringing feed in, because it wouldn't be sustainable, especially in the summertime. But other places in the country, pasture land is enough to sustain your animals. So you have to look at that. Probably, from what I've read, the most expensive cropland is New Jersey, California, and then Arizona. And that premium cropland in Arizona is way up there. But it depends on what you want to do with your homestead. What is your goals for your homestead? Is it just to have some extra land, and then you will have that permaculture area where you'll have your animals, your gardens, your chickens, your fruit trees, and the rest of it is just happy places? It depends on what you want to do and how much you're paying per acre for that. Now, the USDA has information you can print off. Like one of them, all of these have the whole United States on them. One of them is the average cost of pasture land in the United States, and it breaks it down by state. The average cost of cropland, the average cost of farm real estate. And some states will have lots of areas throughout the state that is great farmland. Arizona just has some places. It just depends on where you live. The most economical places that I could find, the cheapest land I could find, was actually Louisiana and Arkansas for farmland. But the caveat with that was that even though you may be paying $600 to $700 an acre, it said that those lands really need a lot of TLC. Now, if you want to give it a lot of TLC, that's good. Why not? Now, if you stay right where you are in the city or suburbs, even if your yard is not that big, look around and see every square inch you can use. But because you're in the city, you have some other options. There's community gardens. Like I usually rent 3 spaces in our community garden. I've had more, I've had less. But on average, 3 plots. Each plot is about 400 square feet, so that gives me about 1,200 square feet of growing, besides my gardens at home. I have also gardened in other people's yards, which is an option for you. There is land that a lot of times you can lease from the city or the county that you could do your gardening. In the county, you might even be able to put your animals on, or maybe you lease it from a rancher or a farmer. So those are options for you. Now, another thing that you have to look at when you're looking at your land is, are you going to drive back and forth each time? Do the kids go to school? Do you work in town? Are all your appointments, doctors, medical things, dentists, how far are they from your property that you have to drive back and forth? Can you consolidate and do those all in one day? Now the kids going to school, that wouldn't work, but maybe you can get your groceries, your appointments, everything that you had to do in town on one day. Then you're not going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But those are costs that you have to look at. When you live in the city or suburbs, sometimes depending on what suburb you live in and how big your city is, you still may have a long drive. Those are all costs that you have. You also have to look at what kind of equipment that you will need. If you move to the country, your equipment will probably be bigger. Now, in a city or the suburbs, to start a new garden, you may have to rototill. Like when we make a new garden space or a flower bed, I rototill. After that, I don't rototill. Other than maybe I have this little tiny rototiller, but I don't use my big rototiller, after I have it initially done. In fact, this fall, before we came down, we sold it because I had my little one and my beds are established, and I didn't really plan on adding too many other beds that I didn't think my little one couldn't do. If you're in the country, you may have a tiller for your garden, but if you're going to have any kind of crops, you're going to need a tractor. So that's just an added expense that you have to just consider. If you're doing a crop that later on needs a combine, most of the time people rent those. They don't usually own their own combine. And companies go through and they do all the different lands at one time. You're considering both ways. You're considering staying in the city or suburbs. You're considering the land. What are you going to do with both of them? What is the goal? If you're going to homestead on either one of them, you have to break it down on what you're going to do with that land. If you're in the country, are you just going to have it for pasture? Are you going to do farm crops? Are you going to do specialty crops? Are you going to add greenhouses? Things like that. Now, there are grants in almost every state now from the Department of Ag where you can get a grant that will pay for all or part of a greenhouse. Look into that. If you're going to do some specialty crops or you want to extend your season so that you can do markets, things like that, look into those grants. In Wyoming, we not only have the greenhouse grants, we also have specialty grants. So if you want to do a specialty crop to see how it works, you're going to do a study, maybe 3 years, depending on what kind of grant you write. You can get help with that. You do have to write reports and you have to document everything. But if it can help you, either in the city or in the country, go for it. Take advantage of those grants that are there. Another thing that you have to look at, not only in the city or suburbs, but on your land. If you're gonna live out in the country, what's the type of rainfall that you get? Because if you're gonna do specialty crops, if you're gonna do even those things like hay, alfalfa, what kind of rainfall do you have? If you don't have enough rainfall, is there already irrigation in place? Are there wells on that property so that you can take water from the ground? Those are things to think about. If they're not, those are expenses that you have to add in to your total cost of moving. City and suburbs, for the most part, you have water from the city. Once in a while, there's a property that has its own well, but that's not very often. Now, if I was going to have land and I was going to have a specialty crop, it'd be one of two things. I would either grow potatoes, because an acre of potatoes, you can make about $3,000 to $4,000 on an acre of potatoes. It's a good deal. There's a lot of potatoes in the ground. But the number one thing I would do is garlic. Now, garlic is fabulous per acre. Is that on an acre of land, it takes you 2,000 pounds of garlic to plant an acre. Your yield on a very low side is 8,000 pounds. On a high side, 15,000 pounds. But average 10 to 12,000 pounds of garlic off of an acre. That is a good return. Now, will you have to hire people? You will. But it's a good profit margin. At a farmer's market, good quality garlic goes for anywhere from $10 to $15 per pound. It's an option. It's something I'm going to work on. But that's just what I would do if I had a homestead. Those are the two crops I would grow for specialty crops. Now, if you're in the city, you're in the suburbs, and you live in an apartment, and you're saying, how can I be a homesteader? You can go on your balcony. Maybe there's land where your apartments are that your landlord will let you do a garden hydroponically. But then, how about community gardens? What about leasing from the city? What about leasing somebody's backyard or part of their yard? A lot of times people get older and then they have this garden space, but they don't do anything with it. And I've worked out plans with different people through the years that I did their garden. They got part of the produce, they paid for all the water, they paid for the seed, and we did this relationship. It's totally up to you. But even apartment dwellers, you can homestead. Now, if you're staying in the city, there are expenses to become a homesteader. First thing you'll probably do is start gardens, fruit trees, flower beds. But then if you add animals, you'll have to have pens, runs for them, for say chickens, for your rabbits. And you always have to look at what is allowed in your suburb, your city, or if you live with an HOA, they may have restrictions. So you have to look at that. There's a balance. But for me, living in the city or the suburbs and homesteading on that land is a perfect solution. I can look for land to lease, areas in community gardens, empty plots and lots that the cities have. A lot of times there's already water in those areas that you can use, and you can work those things out. But you just have to weigh the costs. Weigh what you want to do not just for you, but for your spouse, your family. What is the best thing? Is it living in the country? Which sometimes it totally is. Is it living in the city or the suburbs and owning that land that is yours? What can you do with it? What can you provide for your family? And how can you use the excess to make a profit? As always, like, subscribe, share with the world. We will be back next time with our number 8. And I call that make it, bake it, sow it, grow it. We're going to talk about what you can do in the city and in the country. I'll see you next time.